The CEO of Southern Africa Tourism Services Association joins me in studio tonight. Thanks so much for your time. What's the state of tourism in South Africa at the moment?
Well, over the last couple of years, we've actually done incredibly well. I mean, the sector in 2012 and 2013 grew at 7%. And there aren't many sectors in the economy that are doing as well as tourism. We were certainly impacted on by the Ebola epidemic and to a lesser extent the sort of brief attacks on foreigners. But by far the biggest threat to our industry comes from the draconian legislation that's been imposed on us by the Department of Home Affairs. We saw in terms of the requirements for in-person biometric visas last year that our Chinese market in the last 4 months of last year, and this is one of our fastest growing markets, declined by 50%. So it was decimated. India declined by 15%. We had been at pains to try and engage with the Department of Home Affairs, also through our Ministry of Tourism, but in 10 months, as a major economic sector that contributes 9% to the economy and accounts for 1.5 million job opportunities, we have not had an opportunity to put our case coherently on the table. And in a fully functioning democracy, I quite frankly find this unacceptable.
What's the problem?
Well, the problem is, quite frankly, that Home Affairs have come along and imposed legislation without any proper consultation, without an economic impact assessment study. And if we were going to do something in the mining industry that was going to cost jobs, there would be an outcry, and there would certainly, I would expect within Cabinet, there would be a requirement to do an economic impact assessment study. The requirements sort of kicked in or sort of came to the fore in June. It took us till the beginning of October to get a meeting with the Minister Kigaba, having written copious times to try and request that. He then announced a task team that would be set up to investigate that, and he has not convened the task team to date. And we're now in May. On the 1st of June, the requirement for birth certificates for children under 18 comes in. We find this a heavy-handed measure. It's not in keeping with international best practice. We're the only country in the world that's putting this forward. And in the State of the Nation address, President Zuma actually, and to use his words, we will prioritize a review of the visa regulations to strike a balance between tourism and state security. And our request to the President, the word prioritize, Mr. President, we're now in May. We've got 20 days to go. We still have not got standard operating procedures from the Department of Home Affairs. We have tour operators that book well in advance. Nobody knows what's going on. There are conflicting messages coming out of Home Affairs, and this is not good for our image in the country. It's not good for tourism, and it's going to have quite a devastating effect on our sector.
Okay, help me understand what specific legislation you're speaking about, and secondly, what do birth certificates have to do with tourism and how that's affected?
Well, one of the issues, and I'd like to separate the issue, because one of the things that we hear from the Minister is this is an issue of state security, and there are issues at stake, and there's a security threat. But the biometrics are the requirement for in-person biometric applications deals with security. Birth certificates and the requirements for children under 18 to carry a birth certificate or a copy thereof, and affidavits in the case of single parents, is there to counter the scourge of child trafficking. And while we are totally on side, this is a scourge, but the rest of the world does this in a far more sophisticated way. To come in and require everybody to produce a birth certificate, and bear in mind this is not a standard practice throughout the world. The frontline people who are going to be accountable for this are not the people at Home Affairs at OR Tambo. It's the airline crews where they check in, because if an airline allows somebody to travel with not having the correct documentation, they then have to repatriate those passengers. And 20% of air traffic are people with families. So we have a potential of not only that 20%, but people just generally looking at this and saying that's an extra impediment. I'd rather go to a country that doesn't require that. It impacts specifically on the region as well, because Joburg is a hub. So the countries like Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe and Mozambique will also be impacted on this. And spare a thought for those people who cross the border by land. 400,000 children come in across our land borders every year. We know from UNICEF data that 70% don't have birth certificates. Are we going to close our borders to children?
see David Frost, CEO of Southern African Tourism Service Association, joining me in studio there.